What is real? As a society, we love asking ourselves this question, and so too does Hollywood.
How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain.
The question isn't just philosophical anymore, though, is it? In fact, it's really at the heart of what Web3 does next. So, the Metaverse. Is it going to be the Matrix? Well, maybe. It's way too early to say with any certainty what it is going to be, but it is happening, that is for sure. Just look at Facebook's rebrand to Meta at the end of 2021. Mark Zuckerberg said at the time, the Metaverse is the future of the internet, and it's where more and more companies are betting that we are going to be working, playing, and ultimately existing together. So where does money fit into that future? Well, banks are among those trying to get ahead of all of this and position themselves for this future in the metaverse. Asian banks in particular have been making especially strong moves here. In India, Union Bank has created what it's called Universe, that is supposed to allow customers to choose an avatar, explore virtual lounges, and ultimately browse the bank's schemes and products. Then in September, Singapore-based bank DBS said it was buying land in the metaverse to build its own virtual community, DBS Better World. So are these sorts of ventures genuine attempts to build around future tech, or are they ultimately something a little bit more cynical? Does a virtual reality end up looking like the world we already know, with banks on a virtual high street or not? Let's try and answer some of those questions with Sachin Mittal. He's head of telecom, media and technology research at DBS. Sachin, thanks for talking to us. Listen, I wonder how much you are getting questions about whether this sort of move and talk about DBS getting into the metaverse is a marketing ploy or something that maybe isn't totally sincere, or whether in fact this is something you genuinely believe is going to be a basis for banking in the future.
I won't comment on DBS specific, but I'll talk about the banking sector and the metaverse. And see, I can tell you one thing very clear. There are 3 billion video gamers in the world today, and these people, they are already in the metaverse. Okay, video gamers are already in the metaverse. Rest of us are not. Assuming you and me don't play video games. Okay, so now question is, somebody needs to attract these. You need to build your brand and credibility with these video gamers. So you need to be there where they are. That's number one. Now, when we talk of metaverse, there are two broad, I would say, two kind of thinking. One, how can a bank adopt metaverse to improve the customer experience? That digital experience becomes more real with augmented reality. Second direction is totally different, and it's totally out of metaverse, that you need to be where people are. So if you are into popular metaverses, then you provide those services which they need. Now at this point, it will be a complex set of, we call it multiverse of metaverses, right? So it will be different kind of metaverses from different kind of players. How do you build interoperability among that? And that is where banks can play a big role.
Well, I think there's a lot of hope pinned on that sort of difference. Look, much of the talk about this seems to be so anchored in the future, it's almost sort of difficult to a lot of people to think about, particularly those that maybe aren't necessarily as familiar with metaverse tech like the sandbox. So how long are we talking about before this sort of banking can ultimately really help customers in this environment?
This is a question which needs to be answered first. At what point metaverse will start to have actual transactions between metaverses? That's question number, right? When will that interoperability start? And I don't have an answer to that question because it is still a little bit timeline. A timeline is a little bit few years away. I will think, first of all, we have one or two good metaverses. Okay, you will need to provide some kind of normal banking services. The kind of services which we have today in the banking world. If you are there in the metaverse, can you do that at that point when you need it, rather than opening a separate app? If you think about it, right? We'll see more and more banks adopt augmented reality for customer experience. They'll adopt it for learning and developments. and for customer experience.
Sachin, then what are the biggest challenges to all of this and to where things currently stand as far as banking and the metaverse and Web3 in general are concerned?
Most people think regulations. I don't think so. I think it is the content. It is the content which can spark imagination in the users, and they're drawn to those metaverses because of the content they like. We haven't seen that kind of content for which people are ready to pay.
The other issue, of course, Sachin, is safety, consumer protection. I think this is something a lot of people are going to be worried about. Where do we currently stand on those issues, and how much of a hurdle do you think that's going to be to user adoption?
If you think about it, if someone harasses your avatar, it's more dangerous than writing a comment against you on social media. It's more real. It's more real, and that is why it's important that there's a proper fee. There's a proper authentication. Someone is wearing virtual headsets. Can you really do the retina scan? You can't. So what is the biometric you use? Do you want to use speech recognition? Do you want to use what kind of biometric you want to use? So I think authentication and KYC is the key to this whole phenomena. And I'm seeing even Sandbox is going for more and more security layers, collaborating with more number of players. So I think you're right. It has to be more safer environment for it to take off.
All right, Sachin Patel of DBS, thanks very much for sharing your insights with us there. Now, investing and growing our own wealth is at the heart of much of the world's financial system, of course, but protections are also needed to help keep those investors safe. The European Union has just announced rules on crypto designed to do just that. They've not come into effect yet, but they could have far-reaching implications for the sector. So let's talk about them in detail with Toby Norfolk-Thompson, who's Chief Investment Officer at Matrixport. Toby, the finer details of the EU's markets in crypto assets, what's come to be known as MiCA regulations, seem now to be finalised. Can you give us an idea of what exactly your assessment is of them and what the likely impact will be on crypto?
I think overall it's positive development for global and for European markets. It could provide a lot of much needed clarity. I think some of the key elements of the MiCA rules are that NFTs will be largely excluded. I think on the one hand it introduces more clarity for market participants in Europe. On the other hand, it undoubtedly will increase costs and complexity. And an interesting development is the requirement for all tokens that will be listed to publish a substantial white paper outlining essentially how they will operate. Now, on the surface of it, that sounds very sensible, but there's been quite a lot of interesting analysis around the liability, the civil liability, legal advice, cost, and so on and so forth that will incur. So I think time will tell, whether that discourages people from engaging in European markets. I think, undoubtedly it'll improve the anti-money laundering situation, and the things like the implementation of the travel rule with the zero threshold in Europe is a very positive development, which will enable states, European states, to coordinate better on asset recovery and anti-money laundering issues. And I think that's very important for the industry, because we all know in the industry that actually digital assets by their nature are hugely traceable, and actually should beckon in an era making it much harder for criminals to launder money using them. So therefore that's something that those of us who've been in the industry for a number of time are very keen to see that really follow through.
Toby, how big a deal could this be for institutions as well across Europe?
So there's no doubt that the clarity that MiCA provides will allow more flows into crypto from continental Europe and coordination across European countries. I think that fundamentally the institutional capital in investment banks and asset managers is awaiting clear liquidity and capital rules before it's able to wholesale move into digital assets, and those institutions are typically engaged with digital markets via investment in other institutions, often at an equity level. And really, I think the race is on for the first jurisdiction to lay down those clear and commercially friendly rules.
All right, let's talk in more detail about stablecoins, Toby. It had looked like they were ignored in the 2020 draft of this legislation, but it now seems like they're included. Where does MiCA now ultimately leave stablecoins?
Yeah, as you say, it's very clear that the legislation now includes all stablecoins, including algorithmic stablecoins, and there's a 200 million euro daily threshold cap, which essentially makes it difficult to use them for payments. I think it's hard to see European stablecoins developing within that environment, and I think Europe is not setting itself up for stablecoins to be a large part of the mix in terms of payment technology going forward, which personally I think is a mistake.
And I want to talk to you quickly as well about the UK's move ahead with new legislation on economic crime and corporate transparency. Is this going to make it easier for law enforcement agencies to deal with crypto assets, especially those that they may be suspected of being used in criminal activity? And how does that fit into what's happening in Europe?
The various pieces of legislation that are coming out of the UK are undoubtedly making it easier for law enforcement agencies to freeze crypto assets and to track them. I'd certainly view Europe and the UK separately. I think in Europe, I would say Micah is quite a mix of positive and negative signals to the industry. I think in the UK, there's definitely a recognition of stablecoins being a very large part of the mix of payments that are coming, and the Treasury and the Bank of England have both made that very clear in their consultation papers this year. I think there's a lively debate in the UK about the role of central bank digital currency, with some people calling for it to be extremely small and wholesale indeed, with the vast majority of payments being based upon private stablecoins. So broadly, my view is I think the UK is positioning themselves to be more industry friendly than Micah at the moment.
All right, thanks so much for that, Toby. That was Toby Norfolk-Thompson from Matrixport talking to us there. All right, that's it from us for this episode. Like and subscribe to the video for more content like it, and let us know your thoughts on what's happening in the comments.